Aloha everyone, Stacy here with Hawaiʻi Wildlife Fund. I'm standing at the mouth of the Wailoa River, which is emptying into the beautiful Hilo Bay on a beautiful, partly sunny day to talk to you all about Hawaiian coastal ecosystems. And I came to the coastline today to talk to you all about it. So buckle up, get ready. We're gonna start talking about the jewels of Hawaiʻi Shores. Let's go. Coastal ecosystems, jewels of Hawaiʻi Shores. All these really cool, interesting ecosystems pop up where the land meets the sea. Before we get into the material, I wanted to introduce quickly our environmental education team. Everyone here is a biologist, wildlife lover, conservationist, educator. All of us come together under the overarching mission to protect our native wildlife. Before we get started, it's really important that we all understand the next three vocabulary words on the next screen: ecosystem, invasive species, and endemic species. Let's explore what those words mean. An ecosystem is a community of organisms interacting with the non-living elements of the environment, like soil, minerals, wind, air, all those kinds of things. Now, in an ecosystem, I want you to imagine there's all these moving parts, right? Like a bicycle. Think about a bicycle, all right? We've got all these different moving parts. Some of them are stationary and some of them are moving. But if one piece of that bike is missing, then the system doesn't work correctly, right? So if we take away the front wheel, can the bike go anywhere if there's no front wheel? No, it can't. It doesn't work properly. What about the handlebars? If you take the handlebars off, can you steer? Can you control where you're going? No. What about the pedals? If you take the pedals off, then you have no way of actually moving yourself around. So just like an ecosystem, when one part is missing, then the whole system is thrown off. An endemic species is a plant or an animal that exists in one geographical location in the entire world, nowhere else. In Hawaii, we have a lot of examples of endemic species. One of them would be our Hawaiian monk seals. Can you think of any more examples of plants or animals that only exist here in Hawaii and nowhere else in the entire world? And then we have invasive species. An invasive species sounds like the word invade, invasive. So an invasive species is a non-native plant or animal that gets introduced into an ecosystem and ultimately ends up causing harm and either outcompetes the native species for their resources, like they eat the same food or they need the same resources for shelter or to live, or they're actually eating the native species. There's a lot of examples of invasive species here in Hawaii because our ecosystems have evolved over long periods of time without the presence of predators because of our isolation in the middle of the ocean. So what are some examples of invasive species? Maybe the koki frog, cockroaches, rats, mice. What about plants? Albizia trees, sleepy grass. Can you think of any more examples of invasive species? Today we're going to take a look at only 4 different coastal ecosystems found in Hawaii. Now there are many more, and I'm sure you can think of many cool examples, but today we're only going to talk about 4. We're going to talk about tide pools, anchialine pools, coastal ponds, and estuaries. So let's go. Let's define each of these ecosystems. First, we're going to start with tide pools. These are shallow pools that are right along the coastline and at high tide are connected to the ocean, but at low tide it may seem like separate pools. The organisms that inhabit tide pools are highly adapted to thrive and withstand the radical environmental changes that living here provides. For example, like an increase in temperature and salinity with the coming and going of tides. I am here at Onikahakaha Beach Park on the east side of Hawaii Island to show you all an example of tide pools. Now, normally the water is full in this entire area from the rock barrier all the way up to the grass, okay? Now it's really low tide. We're gonna go see what we can see inside some of these tide pools. And then maybe we'll come back at high tide just so we can see the difference. We came back at high tide. As you can see, there are many more beachgoers here, but the water has been slowly filling in, and the tide pools are now just becoming part of the coastline. Next, we have coastal ponds. These are generally separated from the ocean at the surface. However, sometimes at big storm events or high tide events, they will be connected to the ocean, but they are generally brackish water, which is a mix of both fresh and salt water, and existing separate from the ocean. Next, we are going to explore anchialine pools. These unique ecosystems exist in only a few places around the world, Hawaii being one of them. And here in Hawaii, we have the highest concentration of anchialine pools. These unique ecosystems are usually set back from the ocean a little bit. However, they are still connected to the ocean, but underground. And then they also have a freshwater input coming from the land. These unique ecosystems create brackish water pools in the indentations of the lava. And these ecosystems are host to a handful of specialized and unique organisms, including the Opaiula pond shrimp. And last but not least, we have an estuary. What is an estuary, you ask? Well, it's a body of water that has one or more freshwater inputs that drain into a partially enclosed body of water. So right behind me here, we got the Wailoa River, and then all the way across the bay over there, we got the Wailuku River. Both water inputs, freshwater inputs, are coming into Hilo Bay and mixing with the salt water in the enclosed area from the breakwater. And I'm going to show you what the breakwater is on the next slide. Right above where it says Hilo Harbor, you see a line extending from the land out into the middle of the bay. That is the breakwater, and it protects a channel that has been dug out, which allows for the large cargo ships to safely get into Hilo Harbor. Okay, now that we have a little bit better understanding about what coastal ecosystems are in Hawaii, I want to talk a little bit about what's going on. So, there are a few things that humans are doing that are threatening the health of our coastal ecosystems. The first threat is coastal development. Wherever humans go, so does our insatiable appetite to continue to grow and expand. In the top left-hand picture, you can see an untouched Hawaiian coastal ecosystem. The other three pictures show different ways we are developing the coastline. In every way that we develop the coastline, we are potentially covering up or making our coastal ecosystems very different. As we develop the coastlines, we are creating cityscapes, or we are creating neighborhoods, or we are creating golf courses. In the bottom left photo, That is a neighborhood on a steep slope in Hawaii. And after a rain, you can see heavy amounts of sediment being deposited onto the coral reef from running off of the streets. The next threat is pollution in our groundwater and illegal dumping. The picture on the right-hand side is of some agricultural land. And you see there's a little river, and that river is dumping agricultural waste or fertilizers and chemicals into the coastline there. And what looks like a sandy beach is actually a dead zone created by an algae bloom. Nearshore coastline environments are generally nutrient poor, so when they get an input of nutrients, like from this ag land, it can excite an algal bloom. Another example of nutrients getting into the coastal environment is like what happened here at Kahekili Beach Park in Maui. This is a wastewater injection site. That means that the county of Maui made these injection wells deep underground where they deposited human manure, human waste, and then it seeped up into the coastal environment and caused this invasive algae to bloom, along with a cyanobacteria mat that has covered and smothered the coral. You should see lots of fish, coral heads, and the water should be clear, but we're not seeing that. Hawaiʻi Wildlife Fund actually took the county of Maui to court about this case, and you can learn more about it at earthjustice.org. The next threat to our coastal ecosystems is marine debris. Now, marine debris is anything that's man-made that spent some time in the ocean and is still in the ocean or is washed ashore. Now, most of that would be plastic. Would include anything and everything that you can think of that's plastic, from plastic bottles to plastic bags to straws to forks to spoons, you name it. If it's plastic, we found it on the beach, and including fishing nets and line. So wildlife is eating the marine debris, and they are getting stuck in the marine debris, and it's really not a good thing to have in the environment. Next, we have the intentional and accidental introduction of invasive species. There's that word again, invasive species. That's right. Everything on this slide invades our coastal ecosystems and potentially does a lot of harm. The top two fish, the first one on the left is the tilapia, and the smaller fish there is a molly. These are very successful invaders in our coastal aquatic environments. Marine debris also gives an opportunity for invasive species to get to Hawaii. As you can see in that bottom left photo, there are gooseneck barnacles and some mussels attached to that buoy. We also have invasive plants that can take over our coastal ecosystems, like the lilies in the small picture in the center, and then with the hitchhiker stuck to the dog and stuck to the shoelaces of those hiking boots. It's really important when we're going from the forest to the coastline and vice versa that we take the time to make sure that our equipment is not covered in potential invasive species. And lastly, we have coastal wildlife and habitat destruction by vehicles and other things like ATVs. Turtles, for example, come up onto land to nest during the summertime and late summer, early fall, and driving on the beach can really do some damage. You could actually run over a turtle, or you could shake the ground enough that you might hatch the eggs early, because once the eggs start feeling their brothers and sisters moving around and hatching, that's a signal for them to hatch themselves. So we could have early hatching. Now the good news. I want you to think about this question. Why should we try and save coastal ecosystems? Whatever your answer is probably a good answer. And it's important to know that culturally Hawaiians were very connected to the ocean and the coastline and all of the organisms that utilize those areas. They also recognized that coastal ecosystems helped filter bad nutrients and clean the water and remove sediment and filter the water. And then they also help protect these ecosystems because they valued the different organisms that inhabited these areas. So let's take a look at more of what these native species might be. Starting at the top left and working our way clockwise, we have the pinau, or our native damselfly. In the middle there, we have our opaiula, or our red pool shrimp. And then we have the opeapea, our native Hawaiian hoary bat. And then we have the eke bird. And in the center, we have the kolea bird. And then we have other things like turtles, honuea. And then we also have a plethora of native plants that live in and around anchialine pools and our coastal ecosystems. Some examples of native plants that use coastal ecosystems would be naupaka kahakai, pa'u'o hi'iaka, ilima, nayo, akulikuli. All of these and more are all reasons why we should protect our coastal ecosystems. There are so many other really cool organisms and plants that utilize our coastal ecosystems, and they're all worth protecting. But that's going to wrap up part 1 for today. We are going to have a part 2, and we'd love for you to join us for that, where we're going to dive deeper into anchialine pools, dive deeper into salinity, water quality, and what you can do to help protect our native coastal ecosystems. Aloha!